Hello, podheads, and welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. I am your host today, Holly Lamoureux. But today is going to be a little bit different. We decided to sprinkle in some different content into your feed today. We're going to start doing some bonus episodes here and there where we interview some people or bring some guests onto our podcast. So today we are interviewing Jeremy Hutchinson. And we're interviewing Mr. Hutchinson because he's very involved in the criminal justice reform and all the things that go along with that. So he's got some really cool stories, a really colorful and cool background that we're going to talk to him about. And I think you're going to like it. So stick around. Hello, podheads, and welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. We have a special episode for you today. Today, we're here with Jeremy Hutchinson. Jeremy grew up in one of Arkansas's most recognizable political families, the son of former U.S. Senator Tim Hutchinson and nephew of former Governor Asa Hutchinson. He built a career that placed him at the center stage of power. From becoming one of the youngest members of the Arkansas House to chairing the Senate Judiciary Committee, his trajectory once seemed almost inevitable. But his story didn't follow a straight line. It took turns that few Arkansas politics ever do. And today he finds himself in a very different chapter of his life. So, welcome, Jeremy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate that introduction. I wish it had ended about 10 seconds.
Okay, so just to kick things off, I feel like the first question pretty much has to be what was it like growing up in a political family?
Well, it's probably different than most people would expect. We grew up in poverty. I mean, to be frank, even as young children living in government housing. So, there's a song, I Ain't No Senator's Son, and it implies that comes with wealth and privilege, and not in our case, it didn't. But of course, my dad was not in. He was in the state legislature at the time, but not in federal. But so it didn't feel like what you would expect by any means. But while my parents, my father was a professor, part-time professor at John Brown University. He owned a radio station. He did certainly not wealthy, but they did put a large emphasis on education. We didn't have a TV growing up, and so we read a lot and we're mischievous. Our neighbors probably hated us three boys running around, but we read a lot, took our studies serious, and for the most part, and there were challenges because by the time my uncle Asa had run for U.S. Senate and lost, but and my dad was in the state legislature. So there was a certain expectation. You're a Hutchinson, you've got to maintain a certain, level of decorum and not get in trouble. And so there was some pressure that went along with it, but none of the benefits of being a high profile family, so to speak. But I look back on it. I'm extremely grateful for my dad and my mom, and they gave us everything we needed. And then in high school, in my senior year of high school, my dad ran for Congress, and that he won, and that allowed me opportunities to go to DC for a summer and meet people that I would have never met and engage in conversations that I would never have access to otherwise. And I got to watch how the good in politics, how you could really make a difference in people's lives and help people. I sat out there on the back porch listening to my dad and uncle plot and plan their political futures and discuss everything that was going on in Arkansas, at least. And they got to chair Ronald Reagan's campaigns for president. And I became fascinated with politics, just sitting there and listening to them talk. And so I feel blessed to have grown up in that kind of a family. As we'll get to later, there are drawbacks.
Yeah.
I certainly suffered some, I think, in part because of the last name and the notoriety.
Do you think, though, because of the family you grew up in, that pretty much was your path as well?
There was no pressure to do that
okay.
at all. My younger brother, which is also ironic, since, as we'll learn later in the podcast, but my younger brother went into the FBI and was a FBI SWAT team member in Dallas.
Really?
So And my twin brother did 2 years in the Arkansas legislature and then quit. And it's like, this is not for me. It's too much sacrifice. He's a lawyer in Fayetteville and doing great. So there was certainly no pressure to do that. But I was really attracted to it, and I love the legislative process. I don't necessarily love campaigning, though I don't dread it like some people do, but I think you'd have to be insane to love that. But I did love the legislative process and the negotiating and advocating for ideas, and then being able to help constituents with their Medicaid payments or Social Security, just that kind of stuff was very appealing to me and gave me a sense of significance that I think most of us desire in life.
But you said when you were growing up that you were lucky enough that you saw the good in politics, which on our podcast we talk about a lot, that you don't see good in politics or the criminal justice system. In fact, most of our podcast is about the negative parts of that. So growing up, seeing that good part, can you remember times where you were like, oh, this isn't right? Or I don't want to say your family's behalf, because not like your family was doing negative stuff, but stuff that was happening around them being negative.
Yeah, toughest part is, especially when you start running for Congress or the statewide campaigns. My dad went through a divorce while he was in the U.S. Senate, and the lies and innuendo and the attacks and it was brutal. I think those attacks are usually tougher on family members than they are the actual candidate. So my dad, while he certainly didn't enjoy it, I think it hurt us kids and probably more than it did him. And especially if you're, 18 and you're trying to be popular and make friends and get dates, and then there's TV ads saying that dad's a Nazi or whatever the term they're using. As an adult, you kind of shake that off, but as 18-year-old, it kind of hits you pretty hard that somebody thinks of your father like that. And so there's the negative side certainly exists. And then the scrutiny, politics when this country was formed was brutal. I mean, there were canings on the House floor. There was certainly vigorous debates and name calling, but the scrutiny into personal lives and did not exist like it does today. And there's certainly no, internet and social media that can spread things so like fire like it does today. So it's got increasingly difficult to be in politics, but the good that comes with it still exists, and in my opinion still outweighs the bad for those brave enough to embark in that endeavor.
That surprises me a little bit. As someone, I wouldn't say I ever wanted to go into politics, but I studied it while I was in college, thinking, oh, this is something I could go down the path of and whatnot. The media and the social technology we have today, I've never done anything bad in my life. There's not bad videos of me out there saying stuff or whatnot, but I have a fear that somewhere someone has videotaped me, or there's something negative that would be brought up, because especially during campaigns, what is brought up against that person or their family members is just, to me, that was like completely a no thank you.
Well, that's what's sad is it's driving a lot of really good people away from a noble profession, or it should be at least, and can be. And it's not sustainable. Things have to change, or this experiment we call the United States will fail, because we have to give grace for good people who may not be perfect to still enter into politics. I'm afraid we're heading in a direction that will drive every sane person. All you'll have entering politics are megalomaniacs and people who are just dying for attention, good or bad. They just want to.
Yeah.
And if you look around, you can see that number is increasing every election cycle.
Yeah.
And that's not good for democracy.
As what you have gone through, which we'll get onto later as well, but then your politics background and history and everything, it's interesting to hear you say that you still think the positive in politics outweighs the negatives. As someone who's never been in politics but has done a lot of studying on criminal justice system, I think the complete opposite. And then just with how our government is today and how it's been leaning, and other factors in the world, other countries as well, because it's always just negative things that are talked about. There's never any positive shit. So it is nice to hear that at least someone thinks positive outweighs the negatives right now because you've been in it.
Well, I think it's true that it's far easier to be on the extreme, and it's
Pissed.
far easier to call people names and to be,
Yeah.
if you've never been in a room with somebody, like I'll tell you, some of my closest friends, and during my Valley of Lament, I call it, I had Democrats. I'm a Republican. I don't know if that's been announced, but I'm a Republican. I had Democrats friends who stuck by me through so much, and they're true friends. And we disagree and we'll tease each other about stuff, but I could never sit there and say, you're a communist, because you know them and they're good people and you just have disagreements. If you don't get to know them and you just get siloed into your wing of the political spectrum and camp out there, then sure, it's easy to call everybody names and say vicious, terrible things about people. But if you get involved and you actually start meeting these people that you're politically opposed to, then it doesn't change your viewpoint necessarily, but it certainly changes the tactics that you choose to use to win an argument. And I think that's what I loved about the Arkansas legislature. It was when I was there, at least. I hear that it's changing, but when I was there, we'd have elections and they were hard fought, but then we come together and we get to know each other. And there were only 35 senators, and you got to know them and their kids' names and their spouses, and you could not go down the floor and then call somebody terrible names when their son, Hunter, is sitting there watching this. And so what's wrong in DC, I'm afraid, is all our candidates, our politicians, spend all their time fundraising or going back and forth to their state or going to caucuses within their own parties, and they never really get to know people from the other aisle. And Reagan and Tip O'Neill, which is before y'all's time, but they say 5 o'clock, politics is over, and they'd get together as two old Irishmen and have drinks and cut up and laugh, and they got a lot accomplished, even though they're from very polar opposite sides of the political spectrum. I'm afraid that doesn't happen to the degree that it should anymore.
But I also feel like media has a huge aspect in that.
Especially social media. You can say terrible things.
Horrible.
This anonymity of a keyboard, and then you get vindication. All these people like what you say, and oh man, listen, I'm really making a difference. I'm going to say something even more vile, and see
keyboard warriors,
right response. And then it just becomes a snowball effect where you and other people chime in, and it's hard to do that if you're talking to somebody face to face. But social media, you can have a lot of influence because it reaches millions and millions of people. But you don't have any of the responsibility of having to do that as a person to person. And most people have a little bit of shame left. And if they said that, what they say on the social media to somebody's face, they at least feel a little regret and remorse. And social media, you never have to feel that regret or suffer any consequences for saying some of the most vile, awful stuff imaginable.
And also, like, everything reported is negative. We don't report happy things.
No,
I mean, that's just not, people on Instagram. Yeah. People on Instagram share their best pictures of their lives, and then, they're depressed at home. But on, the news source, it's only negative things. That's not positive. So it's all, I don't want to say it's all fake, but it's a front.
I as a legislator who would sit there, know what's happening, I'd read the newspaper and just be shocked. Where are these sources? That is not accurate at all, but it's taken as gospel by the average person reading it. And that's true of criminal indictments. That's true of, if there's a high profile case, it's impossible to get a fair trial these days because media will jump on it and say, I don't want to name names, but there's people currently in the news who, were accused of harming their mother when there's no truth to that at all. But they endured weeks of being the entire nation thinking that they murdered their mother. scary. I agree with you completely. It's a scary proposition. I don't know how to reverse it other than good people saying this needs to stop. But
Yeah.
I don't know if the good people outweigh the people who enjoy that type of content.
Earlier, you mentioned as a Republican, Democrats reaching out to you after what you went through. I think the listeners, obviously, if they look up your name, they're gonna.
Please don't Google me.
we all did.
I mean, I'd love for you to talk about, I mean, as much as you want to and you're comfortable with your story, and then how that has played into your current role.
I was, as was mentioned in the introduction, I was chairman of Judiciary Committee in Arkansas for 6 years or so. And every year, I was a former part-time prosecutor, state prosecutor. There, I was like, there's some people here that we should not be sending to prison. I mean, this is just somebody who's had a bad lot in life and trying to survive, and or they have an addiction, and they're just, I just thought we're going too far. So I proposed criminal justice reform measures every session I was there. And I don't know if that had anything to do with why I think I was targeted, but I did upset most prosecutors. We could disagree and it'd be fine, but there were some state prosecutors who really did not like me. I don't know how in depth you want to go, but I did leave. I went through a divorce in 2011, and it was, I began living a sloppy life, I would say. Just not the ideal. I mean, I still went to work. I still did everything you're supposed. I got reelected 3 times. I mean, I wasn't like disastrous, but just sloppy. So I think that gave me, there's stuff in the newspaper about, and so I think they saw maybe there's something here. And in 2012, the FBI opened an investigation into me.
Were you a prosecutor at the time?
No, I was in the Senate at the time. And
okay.
So I quit prosecuting when I ran for the state Senate.
Okay.
But they opened an investigation. I learned about it in 2013. In 2015, they closed the investigation and said there's nothing here. No.
When you found out that there was an FBI open investigation about, did you shit a brick? Like what? How did you find that out? Because I would have gone into hiding.
They called me in. I had a client. I was an attorney in addition to being in the state Senate. Arkansas legislature is a part-time responsibility. Yep. I was an attorney as my real job. And I had a client who, I won't go into the details, but I took him to the FBI so he could testify against other people. So I'd been dealing with the FBI and representing this client. I had an FBI agent call me. I didn't recognize the number, and I usually didn't answer the phones, and I wish I hadn't answered that day, but I did. I'll never forget. I was walking down the sidewalk leaving Samantha's in Little Rock, and I answered this phone call, and he introduced himself. I won't say his name, but as an FBI agent, blah, blah, blah. And I tell people that's the last honest thing that man ever told me. Yeah. That was his introduction. But he said he'd like for me to come in, and he said he knew I'd been helping this other agent who was with my client. And he said, I'd like you to come in and I'd like to talk to you. So I went thinking I'm there, to talk on behalf of my client. I go in and there's probably 20 minutes of small talk. And how do you like the legislature? And I was happy-go-lucky.
Yeah.
Talking up a storm. And then about 30 minutes into it, I realized that, wait a second, this guy's not, he's talking about me. And I said at that time, I'm a lawyer. And if I was representing myself, I'd tell me to get up and leave right now. Yeah. But I think there's this, for people who believe they're innocent, as I did, there's this innate desire to just explain it. And so I was just like, listen, this is crazy. And I started talking to him, trying to explain why this is so misguided. I've later had a reason to look at the 302s, which are the FBI's notes from their meetings. And it was shocking. The 302 was a complete distortion of the entire meeting. And one of the reforms I think we need is all law enforcement agencies, most do right now, but the FBI does not. They all need to record every single conversation with every single person of interest or suspect or defendant or anything, because those 302s they write are notoriously false. And but I left that, yeah, with a oh shit.
I can't even. And then it
Terrifying.
wasn't until 2 years later that it was closed.
They closed it 2 years later,
Oh,
but then a new U.S. attorney came in and reopened the case, and I realized they called me back in, and I mean they said you're going to be indicted, and I terrified, and
yeah.
sure enough, I mean I hired lawyers, and I tried to go show them everything. This is, you're off base. This is misguided, and that was a waste of money, first of all, because it cost a lot, the attorneys I hired. And secondly, we were just giving them our case, and they would just change the facts to explain away this evidence that we had submitted. And this went on for, I don't know, eight months or so. And after we had given them all of our defense exhibits, they indicted nonetheless. And I remember sitting, it was my wife's, well, we were celebrating her birthday. It wasn't her birthday, but we were celebrating her birthday. And I was preparing a nice dinner, and I had lost it had come out in the newspaper that I was a subject. And so I had to resign my law firm. And so I still have my license, but I didn't want to put my law partners through that. So I resigned. So I was at home and nothing to do except try to make a nice meal for my wife. And I looked down at my phone and my lawyer was calling, and I answered hello, and he said 2 words, "You're indicted," and just changed my life forever and crushed me. And I'll tell people, prison is not the hardest part about this whole thing. A guilty conviction is not the hardest thing about this whole thing, honestly. This may not be true of everybody, but if you're in the public eye, the indictment was the hardest part. Just that was, I mean, after that, nothing mattered. You were forever going to be thought of as a criminal, and you were in public eyes. You're guilty. If the government indicts you, you're guilty. They wouldn't do that unless you're guilty. And so that was the rough. I called my wife immediately, and she left work and came home, and it was a celebration for her birthday. Was anything but on that day. Tough day.
That's poor timing.
No,
Yeah,
That's really poor timing.
very much so.
Ugh.
If I didn't know better, I'd say they intentionally planned it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
was it the indictment, or was it like not until sentencing or somewhere in between you're like, oh shit, could go to prison?
No, I'd been contemplating that for even before the indictment, because I mean they told me months before I was going to be indicted, and so I always knew that was. I had, moments where you think, I don't think they're going to do it. I think they've finally been convinced, and because you hadn't heard from them for months, so you're like, but I had been contemplating that for quite a while, and I hadn't started doing research to, really plan as an inevitable fact, but I was certainly contemplating it and terrified of it.
Do you want to at all talk about what you were indicted for?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wish it never happened.
Or just give us
Uh,
some. I mean, people are gonna look it up. I'm not gonna lie. Like, obviously,
sure.
it sucks for you. I'm not gonna lie. When you look up your name, because
Yeah.
that's for the rest of your life. And exactly what you said. Even when you're innocent, if you're indicted for something and it makes it online, that's it. When
Yeah.
people look up your name, So
What I was indicted for was, well, there were several. One was a tax thing that boring. I won't say if you're curious, but it was not salacious or anything. The main thing was bribery. The allegation was that I was a state legislator and I had legal clients, and every client I had, every person I met, really, even in the grocery store, would inevitably ask, hey, you need to change this. This is like divorced dads would say, Arkansas law sucks when it comes to dads getting visitation rights. You should change that, And most time you in one ear out the other, but there were a handful of clients who I followed all the Senate ethics rules. And there's a Supreme Court case that came out while I was in prison, a little late, but came out, called the Snyder case, United States v. Snyder, that clarified this Section 666 bribery and said that the government's making felons out of all these state and local officials based on a standard that they can't know. The opinion said if they did not violate their local ethical rules or their local ordinances, or then you can't come in and impose some nebulous federal standard that they have never been applied to them before. And that was great. It also said that you have to have a quid pro quo, which for your listeners, it's Latin, and I don't know exactly what it means, but it's basically there's a mental decision made that in exchange for this, I'll do this. And there was none of that in my case. I mean, these were clients of mine, asked me for very small things. I said no to so many things they asked, same clients, but I wrote a letter of support for them, which I did to anybody who would ask who wasn't the KKK or the Communist Party. I'd say yes to it. I changed to add an amendment because they have an expertise and it didn't benefit them. They just had an expertise that you should change that. And so I did. And then I said no on giving them grants. I said I lost clients I voted against. I remember sending an invoice, I handled an appeal for a client, and they wanted me to vote a certain way. And I voted the opposite way and had finished the appeal. It was before the Arkansas Supreme Court, and sent them an invoice, and they emailed my assistant back, said, fat chance I'm paying that. So I didn't get paid. So it's really a difficult position to be in, to be a lawyer and also be passing laws and changing laws. But the net result is they said that I would not have been hired had I not been a state senator, which I acknowledge. I mean, but that's, that I don't, there's a lot of lawyers I wouldn't hire this tax lawyer unless they were a former IRS agent, because they know stuff. I hire this lawyer because they're good with the judge. I mean, that's so, but they said you wouldn't have been hired unless you were a state senator and you did an official act. You wrote a letter of support on your letterhead, and you changed, added an amendment. And at the time, the Eighth Circuit, as well as most circuits, said that was all that was needed. Said there didn't have to be a quid pro quo. There didn't have to be any criminal intent. It was just a strict liability. If you took money and you did official act, that's all that matters. And
that's what happened while this was going on with you.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be a quid pro quo.
Correct. And I've got emails between me and my lawyer. I'm like, this is insane. How can that be? And he said, it is insane, but and he cited the cases. And I was like, well, if that's the law, I'm guilty of that. But how is that a crime? I mean, that's insanity. But it was at the time. And so they indicted, I was going to fight the first indictment. And then they came and said, you don't plead guilty, we're going to indict you in the second district. And then they came with third district. All of these could have been superseding indictments in the same district. But smartly, I guess, they knew that I couldn't fight 3 different trials. And if I had lost all 3 trials, I would have been a career offender at my last sentencing and gotten 20, 25 years. So I did what I think was a rational thing to do, though I regret it. I had a former U.S. attorney friend of mine, when I called him, like, what do I do? Should I plead guilty? And he said, whatever you do, the odds are you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. And he was right. But I couldn't, I've got an amazing wife, and I could not imagine being gone. I mean, a few years was hard. 25 years, it's just not possible. So I pled guilty, and I could honestly get up and say I'm guilty of the crime. The Eighth Circuit interpreted that section. I was guilty of it. I just couldn't believe it was a crime. But if it is, then, but as I mentioned, a year after I started serving time, the United States Supreme Court came and overturned Eighth Circuit precedents, as well as a lot of other circuits. And so I filed a 2255 motion, which is a collateral attack on the conviction, and used that case as a grounds for it. It was a year after I filed. The judge still had not ruled on a motion to compel discovery, much less setting a hearing or doing anything else. But by the grace of God, while I was waiting on that, President Trump issued a pardon, and that finally triggered the judge to rule. She ruled and dismissed my case because it was moot. I had been out. I was already out. So there's a lot to glean from that. I think, first of all, anybody interested in the criminal justice system should realize that once you're convicted, even if the Supreme Court changed the law, you think I should be free. There's innocence. I mean, people DNA proves they're innocent, and they still sit there for 3 more years. And the system post conviction relief is so slow, and so that there is so much injustice occurring every day in our system, just because it's a slow system. And there's got to be some way to expedite that for people who have innocence claims. Because that's one thing to learn from it all.
Because like you said that you're guilty of what you committed because you didn't think they were crimes. Completely understand that. I think that's another reason why I wouldn't want to go into politics, is there's too many little fine minute details, like the fine print in shit that you don't actually ever read. Now, all of us having gone to law school, we read those fine prints because it's trickery. Do you think someone targeted you? That's my first thing, because why else were you being looked into? And then we need to know about prison life. And then how the hell did you get pardoned by Trump? Like, how did that even start?
Take the first question first. I think everybody's targeted. I mean, I don't know why necessarily, but our federal system, there's hundreds of thousands of federal criminal violations. There's a book that a Harvard law professor, Harvey Silverglate, wrote called 3 Felonies a Day. And the premise is basically that the average person commits 3 felonies every single day that they're not even aware of. If you're being selected, you've been targeted for some reason. Somehow you got put on the radar screen. In my case, I mean, I was in the newspaper for divorce, there was some other embarrassing things that happened that I think they said, this guy looks a little sloppy. I wonder what's going on. But then I also, as you mentioned, my uncle was governor at the time. And I know, I mean, they spent 3 days questioning me about my uncle and others. I think they thought I had the keys to the kingdom because I knew so many people. They were very mad after spending time with me. It wasn't that I was lying. I mean, I don't know. My uncle is a saint, and I've never seen him do anything wrong. And if he did, he didn't come confess it to me. I'm a politician, not a priest. Nobody comes and says, can I tell you the 3 felonies I committed today? And so I finally asked them, I said, do you want me to lie? And they said, of course, we don't want you to lie, but we want you to tell the truth. And we know what the truth is, and what you're saying is not true. I'm like, it is. So you do want me to lie. You want me to say anyways.
And that's how people go to prison sometimes.
It absolutely. I mean, there's a guy in my case before I was indicted that he lied. And I know he didn't even know what he was saying because the government had been asking me about stuff that didn't exist. And we went back and pulled every record, and it just did not exist. And yet when he pled, he cited exactly what this myth was. And I'm like, that never happened, first of all. And we have evidence it never happened. But he never even read that document. He just signed whatever they wanted him to sign. And I was mad at him at the time. And I still am a little offended by it. But after experiencing the amount of pressure they put on you, I'm not mad at him. I mean, it's intense pressure. And but you're right. A lot of innocent people get convicted based on statements people make, either with a promise of leniency or a threat of 25 years if you don't say this. And they did come after me, and I signed the plea agreement. There was a global plea agreement settling all of these things in all 3 districts. And the statutory maximum, I mean, it's the sentence in the statute, the max could be 5 years. They came after I didn't give them the answers that they wanted. They went to each judge, I had 3 of them, and asked that whatever sentence they give me be run concurrent with, not concurrent, forgive me, consecutively with the previous sentences. And so I thought that was certainly violated the spirit of the plea agreement, if not the law, but the judges went along with it. I got 32 sentences, 32 months here, 28 here, 15 of this.
You had already signed the plea deal when
Yeah.
the plea agreement, and then they went and said consecutive instead of concurrent. That's
And
some bullshit.
and the probation officer who files a pre-sentence report that the judge usually goes by, I mean, they said consecutive is not appropriate. These should be run concurrent. And the government objected to their own probation officer and asked the judge to ignore that. And the judge went along with it and ended up getting 8 years when I signed a 5-year plea deal. That was a rough day. That's the day I was driving home and thought about just running off the side of the road, having a car accident. And because I thought I'd lose my wife. I thought I'd already lost everything. And I said, who wants to stay with me for 8 years? I mean, I wouldn't stay with my ass if I'm, well, why would, and she did. I didn't serve 8 years, but she stuck with me through it all. But it was a very, very bad day. So I don't know if I answered your first question completely.
Yeah. I think when, like you said, when you go into politics or when you're put on a level that's public, even not, famous people too, singers, actors, stuff like that. Everything about you now is now public, the good, the bad, ugly, all of it. And people choose to see the bad, but you had you had family stuff going on as well that was public. And so people probably just thought he's a politician, he's, piece of shit kind of thing. And
that's
ran
what
with it.
I asked my lawyer. I was like, I want to fight this. And lawyer said, well, Jeremy, juries don't like politicians and they don't like lawyers. And you happen to be both. But all right, prison.
Oh, yeah. Okay, come on.
What's interesting is prison was a relief. I mean, I'm scared going, but you'd been living in this fishbowl where everywhere I went, at least in my mind, most people probably didn't know who I was and didn't care, but in my mind, you'd go grocery store and you're like, oh, they're looking at me and they're in just constant bad press and shame. I mean, it's just when I got to prison, that was gone at least. I mean, at least I didn't have to deal with it. And what I found, I went to a camp, which is the lowest security at the federal level. But most of them, I went to north of Memphis, a little town called Millington, and probably 80% of the inmates I was with were drug dealers, nonviolent. At least they hadn't been caught doing anything violent. There were certainly some violent people there. It was about 80% African American. I was one of 3 white collar people. And so I was blessed, though. My first cellmate was a lawyer from Memphis. He helped me a lot to adjust. He was only there like 3 or 4 months, but we're still great friends. He's got a lake house in Heber Springs, just north of Little Rock here. And our wives are friends now. I'll say I met some of the scariest people I've ever met in my life. Well, they are the scariest people I've ever met in my life. Not some of them. They qualify as the scariest people. But I also met some of the best people I've ever met in my life. Friends, I'll be friends with them forever. But the tragic, I mean, there was one night that I was scared for my life. And there's a guy alcohol was everywhere. I mean, there's no fence around our camp. So we were in a neighborhood. I mean, I'd be walking the track and you could wave at the people out there cooking their hamburgers on the back deck. And so guys would walk through the trees. I mean, there's some woods. They'd walk through the woods. I never did this, but they'd walk through the woods and meet their girl in the cul-de-sac of the neighborhood. And they'd go to the hotel and then they'd stop by Walmart and get a shopping list. Every inmates all gave them a list of stuff they wanted. And they come back carrying a bag of nothing. There was a little bit of drugs, but most of it was alcohol, cigarettes, shampoo, better shampoo, different underwear. I mean, just stuff you'd want if you were out in the street. They come back and there'd be a network of people set up watching the guard. Come on. And they'd sneak them all the way in and then hand out. We had, Mondays was, it was Popeye's chicken on Monday, you could place orders. On Fridays, it was pizza. We'd have Whataburger. I mean, you could order food from the street. So
This sounds like a little good vacation.
Grab all of our prison questions because this was not.
there's
shook.
also some, but there's some bad parts. I mean, I'll get to the bad,
Yeah.
but my wife would say, I'd call her at night, and I was like, well, I read, I worked out for a couple of hours, got a pizza here.
Sign me up.
That's what she goes, can we trade places?
Right.
I'm my ass off here. I'm trying to, and so it was certainly not what I expected. But the problem with that is there weren't that many drugs. I mean, there's marijuana, but not the heavy stuff, but a lot of alcohol, and awful alcohol. But guys would get drunk. I mean, certain guys, most guys didn't, but certain guys would get, I mean, they just went through their sentence drunk. That's how they passed the time and one guy was a really large African-American, just muscled up, and his name was Gangster. I was a kitchen clerk, which meant I ordered all the food. I basically was not a boss because I'm an inmate, but kind of ran the kitchen. My main job was to limit the amount of food that was stolen from the kitchen. One of the perks of working in the kitchen is that inmates could take food and sell it. They'd have a little side hustle where people in the kitchen would go back and sell 5-pound bags of cheese, or they'd make burritos and sell that. And I'm not going to stop that because that's a good way to get your ass kicked if you try to stop that. But I'd be like, all right, you can steal this, and this, but we need this for Tuesday night. This is, we got to feed everybody. So we got to have this and most of the guys were cool. That's cool. But this one gangster one day he usually was cool about it, but that day he really wanted this cheese. And I was like, you can't take it, man. I mean, we got to have that and he got pissed and walked out. And I thought, okay, but that night he was drunk and he walked around, F. Hutchinson, I'm in bed. It's like midnight and it's loud. It's always loud in there. And I realized, wait, he's talking about me. And so I go get the most vulnerable place you can be in prison, most are your bed and the showers. Your bed, because you can't move. I mean, you're trapped in there and they can just pummel you. And the showers, you don't have any traction. So they come in boots and you're in shower shoes or something, and so that's where you got to be careful. So I'm in bed. And so I go get a lock, like a padlock for your locker. And I stick it in a sock. It's called locking a sock, and it's a common weapon, and you can swing it. And so I went to bed that night and had that lock in a sock right by my head in case he came. But I didn't sleep any until finally about 3 a.m. He went to bed, and nothing ever happened. And woke up the next day, and it was fine. That was the only. I mean, there's times I've felt uncomfortable, but that was the only time I was like scared. Like, this is.
Man, that was anticlimactic. I definitely thought we were going to be swinging, hitting gangsters coming in.
I saw stabbings. I saw people get. But I tell people, if you're a decent guy and show respect on the outside, odds are you're going to be fine on the inside. If you're an asshole on the outside, you're going to have a very rough time in prison. But I was respectful to people. They have their story, and most of them are tragic. I'll tell one quick story about a guy. All he'd ever done was sell marijuana. He had a 30-year sentence. He's a repeat offender, but all he ever did was sell marijuana. And I was out shooting baskets by myself one day, and he came over and was like, Hutch. And they all call me Hutch. Hutch, you didn't know you play basketball? And I was like, well, I used to. And he's like, well, why don't you be on my team? And I was like, I'd love to. And so he let me be on his basketball team. And I was the oldest player in that prison league and the whitest person in that prison league. But he let me join his team. And then I did some legal work for him, and we became friends. And so we're sitting in the computer room one day, sending out emails. And he goes, hey, Hutch, how do you spell Bofus? I was like, Bofus? I'm like, I'm not familiar with that word. I'm like, can you use it in a sentence? And he looks back at his computer and goes, both of us need to call the probation officer.
Oh no.
I was like, oh, both of us. So I go over and delete both of us and type in. And he was like, damn it, I'm so embarrassed, man. I got a third grade education is all I got. And I was like, you don't need to be embarrassed. I mean, but I walked out. I'm like, we as a society failed that third grader. We let him drop out of school and didn't bother to. And then as an adult, we lock him up for 30 years for selling
For weed.
and we pat ourselves on the back and say we achieved justice. I'm like, that is anything but justice.
A hardened criminal right there.
Yeah. And he's the sweetest spirit. I mean, never hurt anybody. And so I met a lot of guys like that. And I met a lot of white collar guys, not at that place, but I went to another, got transferred to, I rode Con Air. I went to the worst place in the system was Atlanta. I spent a week there. I was housed with a Mexican gang leader who had murdered another gang leader at his previous place. And so for my safety, they said they had to put me in the SHU for a week I spent in Oklahoma because I was a high profile inmate. I'm like, I am not high profile. I said, I just spent 16 months at another place and I was fine. I'm fine. Just put me out. And they're like, no. For your protection, we got to put you in the SHU. And so I'm in there like an hour and the door opens up and they bring this guy in. And they're like, he killed another drug leader. So he's got a hit out on him. So he's got to, for his protection, we got to put him in the SHU too. I'm like, what happened to my protection?
You're like, wait a minute. I just signed a document. Like, hold on.
Just put me in a cell 24 hours a day, never leaving with the murdering gang leader. But we got along. It was fine. And
that was in Atlanta?
That was in Oklahoma City. Okay. They transported me from Millington to Oklahoma City for a week and then flew Con Air to Atlanta for a week. And then finally got to Montgomery where I ended. I don't know what else to tell. There's so much about prison. What's one other thing that's really interesting. Race is huge in prison. And I think it's intentional. I mean, it comes from the guards and the warden want to separate people by race because if they ever teamed up together, the guards would be far outnumbered. So they like there to be animosity between the inmates. And so but it was so evident in that you go into the TV room and there's a white TV, a black TV, a Hispanic TV, and a sports TV. And more fights happened over the TVs than anything else. But it was, I mean, like we were way outnumbered. Whites were in Millington. And so there's like one white guy who would sit there all day and watch TV just to protect the white TV. So nobody could. And they're like, if we don't have somebody out there, the blacks will take it over. We got to have and I never watched TV except college football. And it was on the black TV, on the sports TV, but the Razorbacks, so I wanted to watch, they weren't want to watch that. So I was like, I was the only white guy there. I'm like, I want to change the white TV to Razorbacks. And so they did. And then kind of the white shot collar is the term that prison uses. The white shot collar calls me and he's like, man, you can't do that. White TV can never be on sports. I'm like, well, why? White guys like sports. Why can't we? And he's like, you're not a, what this term they use? You're not a convict. You don't get it. Trust me, I've been in a long time. Someday you'll understand, but never put a white TV on sports because the blacks will take it over then. He's got to stay on something other than sports. Like, this is insanity. But so I had a really good friend in the kitchen I talked to once a week, black guy, drug dealer from Nashville, but he never partook of this product, never drank, had a wife and kids. And we're in the kitchen. I had a little office in the kitchen and he'd come in for hours and sit there and we talk. And he described his drug operation and it was so sophisticated. I mean, inventory controls and just, I'm like, dude, you could be running a Fortune 500 company. I mean, got this. And he's like, Hutch, I was a poor black kid. Nobody was offering me internships growing up. So this is but when we go back to the unit, we couldn't talk. I mean, in the kitchen, we'd spend 8 hours laughing, joking. I talk to him once a week today. But when we go back to the cell, the most we could do is walk by and say something real quick and keep moving. But they wanted to keep those races separate. Anyways, that was interesting. I don't know. There's a lot maybe we can get to, but I don't want to just assume it's interesting and talk about it forever. So
I feel like we need like additional episodes of us just ask. I have a million questions. I'm fascinated with prison. I always wanted to be a prison guard, but like one of the good ones. I've always wanted to be in prison. Like it's just I don't, so everything you're saying, I'm like, what? This is so cool. We could have a whole episode of just asking questions. But
the other thing that's interesting is, especially in Millington, almost everybody had a phone. So there's a whole underground economy. I mean, there were guys who working their hustle in prison were making like 6 figures tax free. I mean, and as time was approaching for them to leave, they'd get in a fight or stab somebody so they could stay longer.
oh my God.
Wow.
Because
That's
they
crazy.
did not,
Crazy.
they were making more money in prison than they could ever make on the outside. And they were supporting their families with it. And they were terrified to leave. And so they'd pick up new charges just so they could stay longer. But you had to pay for everything. Like in the TV room, to get a space to watch football or whatever, you had to pay. It was like real property law. Like it was recognized, accepted. This is my space. I can bequeath it to somebody else. I can sell it. It's fully recognizable. It's enforceable. And if you sat in somebody's space, you were going to have hell rain down on you. And so you kept trying to buy somebody would go home, there'd be an auction for their spots. You get closer to the TV. I mean, everything was money. It was all cash app on phones. It was crazy. We talk about the pardon. My dad, I call him I'm just going to blank on the term, prodigal son kind of father, because he just stood by me and was just amazing. And so he was never, I mean, he supported Trump when President Trump became the nominee, but he was for Marco Rubio during the 2016 primary. My uncle was Trump's chief critic, probably in the Republican Party at least. And, talk about a surreal experience. I'm sitting in the prison watching my uncle on the debate stage debating President Trump. All these guys they all love Trump, by the way. 80% African American. They all love Trump. They didn't like politics. They didn't like the news. But if Trump came on, they'd be like, shh, let's hear what Trump says. I mean, they loved him. It was interesting. So they were all for Trump. And there was my uncle up there criticizing him. And they were raining hell down on me. You got to tell your uncle to shut the fuck up.
You're like, dude, look where we are.
Yeah. But so I never thought I had a chance at a pardon. My dad was working on, I knew, and he would intentionally keep me in the dark because he didn't want to get my hopes up. And I just never thought it would happen. And so there were guys there who would talk about getting pardons, and they've hired this lawyer and they're going to get it. And A, I thought it was pretentious. And B, I thought it probably wasn't going to happen. And just talking about it makes everybody else feel, So I never mentioned my dad was even working on it, primarily because I didn't think it ever would happen, and just no point in talking about it. And so one day I'm waiting for chow, and they do a 4:00 count, and then you have to wait for your unit to be called. They call a unit one at a time to eat. Most of the inmates gather in the lobby and race to the chow line, which makes no sense because the food is terrible. I don't know why you want to race there, but they call over the loudspeaker, Hutchinson, report to Montgomery unit, this other unit that's not mine. And I was like, why am I being called to Montgomery unit? And my buddies, I had written the day before, it's called the BP8. It's like an official grievance. And I was criticizing this new policy that they had implemented. And I said, this policy is the epitome of bureaucratic foolishness. And I didn't think it was that caustic, but my buddies were like, dude, man, you called them fools and bureaucrats. You're going to go to the shoe, man. I can't believe you did that. So then I was like, yeah, that was probably pretty dumb. And so the next day after filing that, I get called to Montgomery unit. And I'm like, I'm going to the shoe. I mean, they got my BB-8 there. And my buddies are like, I told you should have written that. And if you go to the shoe, can I have your pillow? Can I have your extra blanket? They just started picking. This is going to be bad. And so I walked through, and their unit, all the inmates are standing out front. So I have to, excuse me. And I opened the door to the cop's office there. And he goes, get the fuck out of here. What are you doing? And I was like, you called me over here. I said, I'm Hutchinson. And he's like, Hutchinson. He's like, oh, go pack your shit. We got to immediately release you. Your pardon came through. And I literally fell against the wall and was like, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. And he goes, get the fuck out of here. And I said, I'm out. And so I went back, blindsided. I couldn't believe it. And my buddies all thought, they were like, what happened? Are you going to? And there's like this survivor's guilt, because I've grown to love these guys. And some of them had been screwed worse than me. And even the ones who hadn't been screwed, it was just brutal to watch them. And the kids are talking about suicide because they miss their dad so much. And so I was whispering because I just felt guilt about, and I said, I got a pardon. And I had never mentioned that I was even trying to get a pardon. So it came as a shock they all acted happy, but, quietly there's also resentment. But I started they said, pack up, we got to immediately release you. So they're like, within like 30 seconds, everybody was around me. Are you going to use the rest of that toothpaste? Can I have this? What are you going to do with this? And so I gave away everything except the clothes I'm wearing out and my law books that I had collected. So I expected to be leaving. And instead, the warden there, he just said, I'm going to keep you. And he kept me for 24 hours just to screw with me. But it was pissed me off, obviously. But my wife drove in from Little Rock to Montgomery, Alabama. My brother flew in, and then they just had to sit there overnight in the parking lot waiting for me to. I'd given everything away, including my blankets and my pillows, so I didn't sleep at all that night. I probably wouldn't have anyways, but I stayed awake all night, showered at 3:00 in the morning, did some manscaping because I was going to see my wife again. And but the time gave me a chance to say goodbye to everybody. And the most incredible thing, they were out on the softball field after word had spread that and about 30 guys came around and said, can we lay hands on you? And I was like, yeah. And so 30 guys that went around, each of them said a prayer for me as I was leaving. And I promised them, I'm not going to forget you guys. I promise I'm going to do everything I can to get you all out of here. And that leads into my next chapter and the career I have now. But
how long in total were you in prison?
2 years and a month.
Okay.
Almost to the day. I went in May 1st of 2023 and got pardoned on May 28th of 2025, but didn't get a leave until May 29th of 2025.
So leaving prison, obviously I'm not going to say not a lot of people go to prison, but you don't get to talk to a lot of people who have been. You've said it multiple times. There's people in there that are obviously innocent. Well, to us, we, having any type of criminal background, but you decided to take on a completely different route and chapter after your release. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, I should go back to your last question about the pardon. We didn't hire anybody. We didn't contribute to Trump's campaign, didn't contribute to the super PAC or anything. We were lucky enough that I had some friends and my dad had friends, and friends went to bat for us, for me. One of those friends ran a criminal justice reform group. And when I got out, I was like, this is what I want to do the rest of my life is, I told those guys I wasn't going to forget them. And it was a pretty new organization. And he was like, we weren't planning to bring anybody on, and we got to find funding for that. And he said, let me get you hooked up with some other groups, maybe. But then about 6 weeks after I got out, he called and said, I don't know how, but we got funding and we got space to hire you. And I know how. I think God said, this is where you need to be, and we'll make it happen. And so they brought me on their group out of Washington, D.C. called Unify US. Back to our original conversation, I love that name because they work across, they're all Republicans and conservatives, but they work across party lines and that's kind of the niche, is to be able to work with Republicans and Democrats on a lot of issues, but criminal justice reform is the primary one. And I spend probably a quarter of my time in DC, and I get to stay in Little Rock. My wife had sacrificed enough, and I didn't want to ask her to uproot and move to DC, and they were okay with that because we're in 17 states, and a lot of them are the southern states. And so they're like, you can get to Alabama just as quickly from Arkansas as you can DC. So I've been blessed. I get to work on issues that we've talked about today and many others, both at the congressional level and about 17 states.
Which is huge. We something I don't know if, for all of our listeners that are listening, Jeremy was brought in and introduced to us by Holly. So that's where the connection came from. Kylie and I didn't know Jeremy before today, other than Google, which, but something that Kylie and I did when we were in law school is we worked for the Federal Probation Office. That was one of our internships.
Pre-sentence investigations.
Oh my God. It was so fascinating. I still to this day would go back and do it in a heartbeat. But one of the main things that Kylie and I got to be a part of and help kind of kickstart and whatnot was mental health advocacy in federal prison sentencing. We got to do, pre-sentencing interviews with anyone coming in. And it was so fucking sad. 90% of the people that we saw and got to talk to and were just normal humans who got the shit end of a stick kind of thing. And so I've always been, to this day, I would still love to do any career in criminal justice reform or on that end, like the Innocence Project and stuff like that. But can you talk about how what you saw in prison now correlates to what you're doing for work? Because it is, you saw people there that, like you said, the guy who was there for 30 years and was just weed. First of all, we don't have to talk about it because I talk about it on so many episodes. That pisses me off.
It's legal in almost every state.
It's ridiculous. That blows my mind to this day. So if you can talk about that for a little bit, just how, what's your passion in this job now?
First of all, let me say there are some people who need to be in prison. There are, you commit violent, heinous acts. You're not safe to be in society. I don't think we ought to lock anybody up longer than necessary, but there are some people who it's necessary to keep them locked up. But those people are in the higher security. They're PDMs, U.S. Pens. They're the people I encountered. I in transportation, I met, gang leader, murderer, but by and large, the people I encountered were drug dealers and white collar people. And you're right about mental illness. It's at least half of the drug dealers had mental illnesses and addiction issues. And that was the only reason they ever engaged in a life of crime. If you could address those two issues, they'd be great members of society. And we don't address it. Our method of addressing it is to throw them in prison for very long sentences that are completely unnecessary. And in so doing, we create generational prisoners because their kids now are far more likely to end up in prison as well once their father's removed from their life. So that is a huge problem. The white collar people I met, there were some scumbags but most of them, if they committed the crime, they weren't aware that they were committing a crime. White collar people typically, I'd like to include myself in this, are like, I'm not going to decide to make $40,000 and risk federal prison. That's not a rational decision. So most of them just, they didn't know. I'll tell you one quick story about a guy he's an older guy. He was like 73. He's still there. Lawyers may appreciate it, but for banks to foreclose on somebody's home, they have to have the original deed and the original note. Well, he's not a lawyer, but he's very smart and very successful businessman. And he found this little loophole, I guess. And so he did the radio ads saying, if you're facing foreclosure, call my little company. And he would just send off, please present the original note, original deed, which no bank has anymore because they collateralize these things into, 5,000 mortgages into one security and then sell it, blah, blah. So he did like 12 of these total. And the banks got upset and went to the feds, and the feds came after him and said, if you'll quit and plead guilty, we'll give you 1 year probation. And he said, I'm not doing anything illegal. That's the law. If you don't like it, change the law, but I'm not doing anything. And he's stubborn and so he went to trial, and I'm sure he pissed off the judge because he can be obstinate, but his experts were up there. The government had experts up there. It went over the jury's head completely. We're patriotic, so we got to support the government, and convicted him. At sentencing, the government said, if we hadn't stopped him when he did, he would have cost the American banking system, $800 billion or something. And so we would like, Judge, for you to impute that loss amount toward his sentencing, and which is they can do that. Imputed loss, not even real loss. Just the judge said, well, that seems a little arbitrary. I'm just going to do 90 million, and sentence him to 27 years of prison, 1 year of supervised release probation to plead guilty. He exercised his constitutional right to go to a trial, and they punished him with 27 years. He's still there. He's been there for 17 years, and every night he's in the law library filing stuff. Most tragic thing I've ever seen. Those are the kind of white collar people I'd meet. Just guys who, again, there were some exceptions. There were some people who were real scumbags, but most of them just didn't know that what they were doing was a crime, or it wasn't a crime. And so it was tragic. And I'm struggling now to remember the question after I rambled on for a while.
No, you're good. What your passion is now with, working for what you do?
There's so much. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's 300,000 or plus, I don't quite know the number, but hundreds of thousands of federal criminal code. And there's a whole story from history. Caligula, the famous Roman emperor, who was known for his debauchery, most known for his debauchery, but he also was just an incredibly cruel emperor. And he enjoyed issuing new edicts, and he'd write in very small font, and then he'd post that edict like 30 feet high on top of a pillar. And he'd get great joy out of convicting his citizenry for violating the new edict that they didn't know, I couldn't even read. And what Caligula did by intent, I'm afraid the United States has done by negligence or just lack of caring or ceding power to the bureaucracy or whatever, the prosecutors that have infinite number of ways to interpret statutes. And in so doing, we're the number one incarcerated nation in the world. We have 4% of the world's population, 22%, I believe, of the world's incarcerated population. And that's a policy decision, because we're not inherently evil as Americans. We're not more evil than the Scottish or the Swiss, but for some reason we have 10 times the amount of incarcerated people. So that's a policy decision we've made. Are the results good? No, hell no. The result is we have one of the highest crime rates in the world. I think only France has a higher, of the industrialized nations, only France has a higher crime rate. And what's our recidivism rate? It's the highest in the world. So every possible metric that you can gauge the success of our criminal justice system, we get a abysmal F on. And yet we keep doing it over and over and over again. And you look at other countries who've taken far more compassionate or smart. I don't know if it's compassionate, it's just smart. Their results are a lot better. In states that, like Texas, not known for being a liberal bastion, but they've implemented a lot of criminal justice reform measures. They have with even the border, which is something that most states don't have to deal with, in Houston and Dallas and a lot of big cities. And they closed, I think, 3 prisons in the last 15 years or so. They have the better recidivism, or half of what Arkansas is, recidivism rate. And their crime rates now are as low as since Leave It to Beaver was on TV. I mean, they are achieving far greater results. And so why does other states, and why doesn't the United States as a whole look to other countries that have worked, look to states that have implemented reforms and say we can do better?
What do you think that those reforms are that they're implementing that are successful?
Well, there's a lot, but the main ones I think are the intervention for drug offenders. Instead of locking them up, they get them treatment and at least give them another chance. Now, at some point, you may have to lock them up if it just doesn't, but they at least give them a shot to heal their addiction. They've lowered some sentences on stuff that is unnecessary. They have a robust parole system and incentives to take classes and learn to trade, and you can get paroled earlier if you prepare yourself for reentry. And then they have a good reentry system. They allow people with a record to get a welding license or a plumber's license or be able to have a trade. The surest way to ensure somebody goes back to prison is if they can't get a job. If we say, well, if you've got a felon on your record, then you can never be hired anywhere. Well, it shouldn't come as a great shock that we end up dealing with them in our court system again. What other options do they have? And so there's a lot of stuff they've done, but those are kind of the big things that try to address the root issue rather than just using long sentences as a cure for every malady that humanity suffers from. And if other countries have done it, states have done it, it's always been successful. Whereas in states that are close to you and me, Holly, that I won't name, but we've pursued the opposite strategy by and large, with some exceptions, and the results are not good. We're having to build more prisons instead of closing prisons. We're building more prisons instead of seeing reduced crime. We're seeing higher crime. It's not conservative or Democrat or Republican. It's just, this is proven to be smart. This is proven to be futile and disastrous. I think for once we ought to set aside the political sound bites and say, let's try to do the smart thing. So that's kind of my mission, to hopefully educate. And I'll say this, and I don't know your audience, and I hope it doesn't offend them, but I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian. And when I was in prison, I studied the scripture, had a lot more time on my hands, so I could delve deep into stuff, but I studied what does God say about criminal justice? And I looked at everything. I tried to. And most interesting is from the very first crime, which was Cain murdering Abel, his brother, God himself came down and dispensed punishment. It wasn't a judge or a prophet or a king. It was God. And for murder, God said, Cain, you're going to have to wander the earth. He had a family. He raised kids. He didn't execute. That's why I'm against the death penalty. I mean, if God himself doesn't kill somebody for murder, then who are we to do it? But Cain said he was scared, and he said, somebody may try to kill me. And God said, I'm going to mark you with a mark that warns, if anybody punishes you more harshly than I've punished you, then they will be punished 3 times greater. And so from the very first story of Scripture, God says, woe to those who punish more harshly than me. And yet we saddle up, let's lock them away for life. And then in the Old Testament, which was pretty harsh in some ways, there were no prisons. God refused to establish prisons. The pagans had prisons, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Syrians, you name it. They all had prisons, but not God's people. I mean, there was capital punishment, but for theft, you stayed in the community, you stayed with your family, and you repaid the victim. And then the New Testament, the entire New Testament church was built by prisoners, by felons. I mean, Bartholomew, Zacchaeus, Matthew. I mean, you go through the whole list. Paul. I mean, they were all, and God could have chosen anybody to build his church, and he didn't pick the kings or the lawyers or the Sadducees, or he picked the criminals. And I just think God's got to, throughout Scripture, he refers to criminals with right there with widows. And if you visit the prisoner, you visited me. I mean, he has a soft heartness. And so I think it's frustrating that Christian conservatives, of which I am one, have been leading the effort to lock them up and throw away the key. And when I think breaks God's heart every time somebody gets sentenced to 10 years for a nonviolent drug offense, and their kids are left for Satan to attack, and for it's just it's not scriptural in my opinion. So my passion comes from what I've experienced, but also for my faith. I think it's a disastrous system that I know God did not design, because God doesn't design a system with disastrous results. The God who created this universe has order and did not design a system that's as disastrous outcomes as the current system that we operate in. There's my soapbox. Thank y'all for letting me share it.
Oh, that's great.
For our listeners, or just the average person, what, if anything, can anyone do? Is it just education on what's going on? Is there any advocacy work that people can do? What do you want people to take from this and implement?
Well, there's a lot of things that can be done. First, if you want to go to unifyus.us, you can sign up, join us. But there's a lot of other great groups out there. The Innocence Project. There's Just Trust. There's a bunch. I would say this: if you really want to get a feel for, there's a current HBO documentary that's on right now called The Alabama Solution. It's up for an Oscar, and I think we'll win it. And my group has held screenings around the country to invite legislators to come and watch it. But it's basically inmates in Alabama using their phones, recording what's happening in the prisons. And then it's a beautiful story and tragic in many ways. But if you have been to prison, I'd caution you, there's some PTSD moments in there, but I'd encourage watching. And at the end of it, it has a list of groups that you can sign up and be a part of. And so that may be a good way to kind of, I mean, if this hasn't convinced you, go watch that documentary, and I promise you'll be moved by it. And then I would say one of the things that I've been doing since I got out that's the most meaningful to me is I go to our state prisons through my church once a month and give a little talk. But my talk is meaningless, but I get to afterwards, there's 200 men who come up and share their stories, and they're worshiping God. I mean, it's the most connected to God I've ever felt in any church. I mean, and it's a prison church. And if people would take the time and go down and visit a prison or join a prison ministry or do something, I think you'd walk away with a completely different attitude about the men and women. I don't go to the women's prisons, but men and women who are there. Again, there are some bad ones, but I think you'll have a change of heart in dealing with most of them who are, as somebody said, I think knuckleheads who we get mad at and decide to lock up rather than real threats to society.
So before we finish this episode, I wrote some rapid fire questions for you that you did not see ahead of time, but they're funsies. They're funsies. So just to keep it short and sweet. Okay, so what was the first thing you bought when you got out of prison?
I didn't buy anything because I didn't have any money.
That's true.
My wife stopped and had a steak and potatoes and a glass of wine.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
What was your best prison meal?
Oh God. I mean, besides the pizza we get from the outside,
Yeah, it has to come from not and the cheese. I mean, I guess the cheese was pretty good.
No, it was not good.
Oh, okay. Never.
It was coveted, but not. It's just it was not good. But very low standards in prison. I mean, I guess I tell you the best meal. There was a holiday. I think it was Memorial Day or something, and they're supposed to do special meals on holidays, which aren't special, but they're different at least, which is a treat. But this kitchen cop we had didn't want to do it, and so I was the kitchen clerk, not a cook, but I said, we got to do that. And he's like, I ain't doing it. And so I said, well, what if you let me do it? I said, we had a grill out back that had been rusted over and had never been used. And I said, if we cooked it, the hamburgers and hot dogs on the grill, would you let us do it? And he said, all right. So me and some guys, we didn't have charcoal. We didn't have lighter fluid, but there's a bunch of old dead wood over there in the woods. And we went over there and broke it up and stuck it in this big grill and lit a fire and then grilled hamburgers and hot dogs. And it felt like humanity, a bunch of us guys sitting around the grill criticizing each other on how the fire was started. And you don't know how to cook a burger. And but I don't know if the food was that great, but the experience and the guys so appreciated that we did that for him. And so that was definitely the best meal.
What would you consider is the biggest misconception about yourself?
I would say not just myself, but if you get labeled a felon, there's a I don't know, stigma that attaches to that is wholly unfair in most cases. Whether you're an employer hiring somebody or you're just run into somebody and you hear they've got a record and you immediately are repulsed by it, that's more of an issue with you than them. And that's not to say there aren't people you need to be concerned about, because there are, but you ought to at least investigate and learn about the person before you make assumptions. And I've been pardoned, which is technically erases that felony, but if you Google me,
sorry.
So I've suffered from that, but I know all of us do who've ever gone through it, and it's crushing, honestly. Even when you get out and serve your time, it's a crushing weight that never goes away.
What is one law that you would pass for fun?
Well, I actually filed this law in Arkansas, but never really pursued it. But it was the Right to be Left Alone Act. And it just basically said, just leave me the hell alone. Don't call me, companies. Don't send me ads on my email. Don't, just leave me alone. Give me some peace. And got a lot of laughs, and I was serious about it. It was, I thought, but it implicated a lot of industries and going to require a lot more work than I had initially planned, so I didn't pursue it. But I do think there's a great appetite for people in this world. Just leave me the F alone and let me live my life.
I'd vote for that one.
Yeah. That's right up Kylie's alley.
Yeah. Okay, so do you listen to true crime? And if so, what is your favorite case or your case that keeps you up at night?
Oh, it keeps me up at night. Well, one you all talked about that I was familiar with because it's from Arkansas, that Dirksmeyer, Norman Dirksmeyer.
No, yeah. Yep, Russell.
I don't know if that one keeps me awake at night, but I'm fascinated by it, and because it's obviously in Arkansas. But I think it's the ones that involve kids, and I would consider a no-nut kid, but certainly younger ones. And I will say, in prison, if you've done harm to kids, there's a virtue that exists in prison that is stronger than anything in society at large. They will seek vengeance on behalf of children who've been victimized by people. It's a brutal vengeance. Maybe that's colored me, but I really, those cases that involve kids haunt me.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Did you wear a jumpsuit, and if so, what color was it?
Oh my God. Did my wife give you this?
No, this is the shit that I normally talk about. So, was it a sweatsuit or a jumpsuit? Because I know some places are sweatsuits.
No.
Okay.
They did allow us to buy sweatsuits from the commissary, but you couldn't wear those during the day. That was only after 4:00. when I first got to prison, they had us in these green, it was a button up shirt, it was pants with a little belt, also green. And it was, I mean, you still had your prison number here, and but you felt like a man. I mean,
Yeah.
you look like a mechanic, you know.
Yeah.
It's a noble profession, and you felt like a man. It was fine. And then after a few months of being there, the warden there decides really just to punish us. He put us in these bright yellow jumpsuits that were hideous looking, polyester. They itch your skin. But the reason he said it was because he was tired of people running through the woods but
Mhm.
we're like, nobody's wearing their uniform as they run through the woods. You put on sweats, I mean, it accomplished nothing except humiliate us, and had big white plastic buttons, and we looked like clowns in this. And I kept a journal, and that day's journal entry, I said, you say dress for the job you want, not the job that you have. And I said, we went from having shirts and pants and to, I mean, they're preparing us to be clowns or dancers in an MC Hammer skit. It was so hideous. But they do that to humiliate you. I mean, there's no logical explanation for it other than emasculation and humiliation. I went to the next place. It was back to the green. So there's just that one warden who wanted to humiliate us. It worked. My wife would show up for visits, and I was just mortified that she was seeing me in this thing. It's not flattering at all. And so, yeah, I wore.
Sorry to bring that up again, then, a little PTSD moment there for you. How do you feel about polygraphs?
I think they're awful. I don't think
just making sure.
Any bearing in deciding guilt or innocence. I mean, you can beat them. I also think a lot of innocent people fail them because you're so stressed out, and I think they're worthless.
Okay, just making sure.
There's a reason a lot of people don't report crimes, because they'll end up being trapped in it. Or I'll tell a quick story. When I was a prosecutor, a lady came to my office, and she said that her boyfriend had been beating her up, and said she had photos, and she pulls out these photos, and she's in a bikini and she's bruised up. I mean, there's definitely somebody's been beating her. And I was like, where are you when these photos are taken? And she said, my trailer. And I said, this is your trailer? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, well, whose meth lab is that behind you? She was like, oh my God, give that back to me. But I didn't pursue it. You're just like, people report crimes, and then just the police in general, it's dangerous so it's it's a system that definitely needs reform, and a lot of innocent people get trapped, and it's never going to be perfect. We're humans. We're never going to be able to be perfect, but we can certainly strive for it. And we don't even care, I think, in this current system.
Okay, guys, well, I'll close you out if we're all good with that. So again, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute honor for you to join us, and it's been very, very enlightening for me, and I think the girls, and hopefully our audience as well. And if you listeners want to get involved, we will link Unify Us to this podcast in our show notes. And there is a place on their website where you can join to be a part of their cause. That is unify.us. And with that, thank you for listening to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. We will see you next week for our regularly scheduled episode. Thank you. Bye.
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 You got to say bye, Jeremy.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.